The city breathed in rhythms of steel and glass, a morning symphony of screeching tires and distant sirens. But on the corner of Fifth and Amberside, another kind of music existed. It flowed from the weathered fingers of an old man named Samuel, whose skin was a roadmap of a long life, creased with smiles and sorrows. He sat on an overturned milk crate, his back against the cold brick of a forgotten haberdashery. In his hands, he held not just a violin, but a vessel of memories, its dark wood glowing with a patina that time alone could bestow. He called her Eleanor. Samuel didn't play for coins, though the few that landed in his open violin case were received with a gracious nod. He played because the music was the only language left that could speak of his late wife, of the son he lost too soon, of the joy and the ache that lived side by side in his heart. His melodies were intricate and soulful, a tapestry of classical grace and bluesy lament that seemed to hang in the air, a fragile shield against the city's harsh clamor. Most people rushed by, their minds tethered to the digital leash of their phones. But some, the truly observant, would pause. They would see the way his eyes closed, the way his body swayed, a man communing with ghosts only he could see. They would hear a quality in his music that was absent from the sterile perfection of recorded tracks. It was the sound of a human soul, unfiltered and raw. On this particular Tuesday, the air was different. It was charged with an electric hum of importance. Sleek black cars, the kind that purred instead of rumbled, lined the street. Men in sharp, dark suits with earpieces spoke into their wrists, their eyes scanning the crowd with professional detachment. The historic Amberside Grand Theatre, a jewel of Art Deco architecture just across the street from Samuel's Corner, was being prepped for a major event. A massive banner was being unfurled, bearing the face of a man with a severe haircut and an even more severe expression, Mr. Alastair Sterling, CEO of Sterling Corp., a global tech behemoth. The gala tonight was in his honor, a celebration of his company's latest, world-changing, acquisition. Samuel paid them no mind. His world was the four strings beneath his chin. He was lost in a rendition of a Bach partita, his fingers dancing across the fingerboard with a dexterity that defied his age. A young woman, a barista from the coffee shop next door, stopped on her break, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Sounds beautiful today, Mr. Samuel," she said, dropping $1 and a small pastry into his case. He opened his eyes, the final note hanging in the air like a sigh. "Thank you, child. The old girl's feeling talkative this morning." The moment of peace was shattered. A hulking man in a suit, his neck thicker than Samuel's thigh, planted himself directly in front of the old musician. His shadow fell over Samuel like an eclipse. "You're going to have to pack it up, old man." Samuel blinked, slowly coming back to the present. "I'm sorry, son. I'm not bothering anyone." "You're bothering me," a new voice cut in, sharp and imperious. Alastair Sterling himself strode forward, flanked by 2 more security guards. He was immaculate in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Samuel's entire worldly possessions. He looked at Samuel not as a person, but as an unsightly piece of litter marring the pristine image of his grand event. "This entire block is reserved for my gala. We have esteemed guests arriving, and the last thing they need to see is this." He waved a dismissive hand at Samuel, his violin case, and the overturned milk crate. "Sir, I have a permit," Samuel said softly, his voice calm but firm. He reached into the inner pocket of his worn coat and produced a folded, laminated paper. "I've played on this corner for 15 years. Never been a problem." Sterling didn't even glance at the permit. "Permits can be revoked. I own half the buildings on this street, including the one you're leaning against. Your permit means nothing to me. You're an eyesore and a public nuisance. Now, I'm telling you for the last time, pack up your junk and leave." The barista, who had been watching with growing anger, stepped forward. "Hey, he's not hurting anyone. He's a local treasure. Sterling's cold eyes flickered to her for a millisecond. And you are? He didn't wait for an answer, turning his attention back to Samuel. The message was clear, she was beneath his notice. Samuel sighed, a weary sound. He knew this kind of man. A man whose soul had been paved over with concrete and currency. Arguing was pointless. It was better to retreat, to save his dignity and his peace. All right, son. No need for hostility. I'll go. Slowly, with the deliberate movements of old age, he began to unfasten the shoulder rest from his violin. He was about to lay Eleanor gently in her case when Sterling's impatience boiled over. He was a man accustomed to instant obedience, and the old man's measured pace was an affront. I don't have all day. Sterling snapped. He nodded at his head of security, the thick-necked man. Donovan. Expedite this. What happened next was a blur of calculated violence. Donovan stepped forward, his polished shoe lashing out, not at Samuel, but at the violin case on the ground. The case flew open, spilling the few dollars and the pastry onto the grimy sidewalk. But that wasn't the target. With a chilling deliberation, Donovan raised his foot and brought it down directly on top of the violin Samuel was holding. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a sickening crack. A splintering sound that cut through the city's drone with the finality of a snapped bone. The bridge of the violin shattered. The neck, so lovingly carved over 2 centuries ago, broke away from the body with a groan of dying wood. Strings coiled like wounded snakes. Samuel stared, his hand still hovering in the air where Eleanor had been just a second before. He looked down at the mangled pieces of wood and varnish, the heart of his life lying broken at his feet. A gasp escaped the small crowd of onlookers. The barista cried out, her hands flying to her mouth. Samuel didn't make a sound. He simply knelt, his old knees protesting, and reached a trembling hand towards the wreckage. He couldn't bring himself to touch it. It was like looking at the body of a loved one. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. It was a vacuum, filled with the collective shock and disgust of the people who had witnessed the act. Sterling watched, a smirk of satisfaction on his face. He saw only a broken trinket, a victory over a stubborn old fool. He had no concept of what he had just destroyed. To him, it was just a piece of wood. See, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. That wasn't so hard, was it? Now clean up this mess. He turned to his head of security. Donovan, give him $100 for the firewood. Donovan reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it down. It landed on the splintered body of the violin, a final, grotesque insult. Samuel didn't look at the money. He didn't look at Sterling or his goons. He looked only at the ruins of Eleanor. A single tear traced a path through the deep lines on his cheek and fell onto the shattered wood. The city's symphony played on, but for Samuel, the music had stopped. He was alone on his corner in a world that had suddenly gone silent. He remained kneeling, a statue of grief amidst the uncaring flow of the metropolis. The crowd that had gathered began to mutter, their whispers a mix of outrage and fear. Phones were out, recording the aftermath. The footage began to circulate, a silent testament to a casual act of cruelty. But Sterling was already walking away, his mind on his gala, on profits and prestige, completely oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed. He was a king in his own mind, untouchable, and he had just silenced a beggar. He had no idea that the silent string of that broken violin was tied to a destiny that would bring his entire kingdom crashing down. The hours that followed were a gray, formless fog for Samuel. The barista, whose name was Maya, and a few other sympathetic locals helped him gather the pieces of Eleanor. They spoke in hushed, angry tones about Sterling, about injustice. Someone collected the $100 bill and tried to press it into Samuel's hand, but he wouldn't take it. His hands, those hands that had coaxed such divine sounds from wood and gut, seemed to have forgotten their function. They were just old, empty hands now. Maya gently placed the splintered remains into the damaged case and closed the lid, a final, funereal act. "Mr. Samuel, you should report this," a man in a construction vest urged. What he did was wrong. It was destruction of property. It was assault. Samuel shook his head, his eyes distant. "What's the use? He's Mr. Sterling. He owns the city. I'm just an old man on a corner. Who would listen to me?" His despair was a palpable thing, a cold weight that settled over the small group. They knew he was right. In a world where money screamed, the whisper of a poor man was easily lost. They helped him to his feet and Maya walked with him, carrying the coffin-like violin case, to the small, one-room apartment he rented a few blocks away. He thanked her with his eyes, words having failed him entirely. He closed the door, and for the first time in over 50 years, his apartment was silent. There would be no evening practice, no gentle melodies to fill the lonely space. There was only the gaping silence where the music used to be. Meanwhile, across town, the first wave of digital outrage was beginning to ripple. The videos from the onlookers' phones had been uploaded. Titled, "Billionaire CEO Destroys Elderly Musician's Violin," the clip started gaining traction on social media. The visuals were damning. The arrogant posture of Alastair Sterling, the cold efficiency of his security guard, and the heartbreaking image of an old man kneeling over his shattered instrument. Comments flooded in, a torrent of fury and condemnation. "This is pure evil. Who does that Sterling guy think he is? I hope someone finds this poor man and helps him. #Cancel Sterling Corp." At Sterling Corp headquarters, a frantic junior PR assistant named Chloe saw the hashtag trending. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She burst into the office of her boss, a seasoned but perpetually stressed woman named Evelyn. "Evelyn, we have a problem. A big one." Evelyn was reviewing the gala seating chart. She looked up, annoyed. "Unless the guest of honor has cancelled, there are no big problems, Chloe." "The guest of honor might be the problem," Chloe stammered, holding out her phone. "A video of Mr. Sterling is going viral. It's not good." Evelyn watched the 30-second clip. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. She saw the casual cruelty, the tossed $100 bill. She saw a PR catastrophe of epic proportions unfolding in real time. And she saw something else, something that made her blood run cold. She zoomed in on the broken violin, on the unique, hand-carved F-holes and the distinct pattern of the wood grain, now tragically split apart. Her breath hitched. "Oh no," she whispered, her professional composure cracking. "Alastair, what have you done? Should I draft a statement?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "A denial? An apology?" Evelyn shook her head, her mind racing. "An apology won't cut it. A denial is impossible. He doesn't know what he's done. He has no idea who that old man is." She looked at the seating chart, at the name at the head table, right next to Alastair Sterling. Guest of honor, Maestro Antonio Bellini. The world's greatest living violinist. A musical prodigy who had sold out every major concert hall on the planet for the last 20 years. A man notoriously private, fiercely loyal, and known for his passionate advocacy for authentic, soulful musicianship. The gala tonight was a fundraiser for his foundation, Strings of the Soul, which provided musical education to underprivileged children. Sterling had moved mountains, and donated a staggering 8-figure sum, to secure Bellini's attendance. It was to be the crowning jewel of his public image, branding him as not just a titan of industry, but a philanthropist and a patron of the arts. Evelyn picked up her phone, her hand shaking so badly she could barely dial. She had to warn Sterling. She had to try and contain this before Bellini found out. But she knew, with a sinking certainty, that it was already too late. The echo of that silent, broken string was already on its way, and when it reached the ears of Maestro Bellini, it would become a thunderclap. In his penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, Antonio Bellini was methodically polishing his own violin, a Guarneri del Gesù worth more than the suite itself. He was a man who found stillness in ritual. His phone buzzed on the marble tabletop. It was a message from a trusted friend, a concertmaster from the London Symphony Orchestra. The message contained no words, only a link to a video and a single, stark question. "Isn't this?" Antonio clicked the link. He watched the short, grainy video. He saw the arrogant man in the suit. He saw the security guard's polished shoe rise and fall. He saw the violin shatter. And then, the camera zoomed in on the old man's face, a mask of silent, uncomprehending grief. The Guarneri slipped from Antonio's grasp, landing softly on the plush velvet of its case. The world around him seemed to dissolve. Time rewound 50 years, to a dusty, cramped workshop in Cremona, Italy. He was a boy of 10, small for his age, with fire in his heart but clumsiness in his hands. He was about to give up on the instrument that seemed to hate him. And there was a man, a brilliant young luthier and a player of sublime talent, who had taken him under his wing. A man who taught him that a violin was not a tool, but an extension of the soul. A man who had gifted him his first proper violin, a beautiful instrument he had made with his own hands, an instrument the young Antonio had nicknamed Eleanor's little sister. That man's name was Samuel. His teacher. His mentor. His savior. The man who had disappeared from the world decades ago, whom Antonio had spent years trying to find, to thank, to repay. He was looking at him now. An old man on a cold city corner. And he was watching the second love of Samuel's life, the violin he had always called Eleanor, the masterpiece he had refused to sell even when he had nothing, being destroyed for sport. A rage, cold and pure, washed over Antonio Bellini. It was a rage born of love, loyalty, and a lifetime of gratitude. He looked at the face of Alastair Sterling on the gala banner visible from his window. The man who was about to honor him, the man whose foundation he was supposed to bless. Alastair Sterling thought he was hosting a party. He had no idea he was about to face a judgment. The maestro picked up his phone. He didn't call his publicist. He didn't call the hotel security. He called the one person in the world who understood the depth of this sacrilege. "Maria," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, to the head of his foundation. "Change of plans for tonight. The concert is still on. But the performance will be different." The storm had arrived. And it was wearing a tuxedo. The Amberside Grand Theatre was a sea of manufactured elegance. Diamonds glittered on wrinkled necks, and the air buzzed with the self-important chatter of the city's elite. They were all there to see and be seen, to orbit the gravitational pull of Alastair Sterling and his guest of honor, the mythical Maestro Bellini. Sterling stood near the grand staircase, a flute of champagne in his hand, accepting congratulations for his philanthropy. He was the king of the world, and this gala was his coronation. The incident from the morning was a distant, insignificant memory, a piece of trash he'd had swept from his path. He hadn't seen the videos, nor had he any idea a storm was gathering just beyond the gilded doors. Evelyn, his PR chief, finally managed to fight her way through the crowd to his side. Her face was tight with anxiety. "Alastair, we need to talk. It's urgent." "Evelyn, relax," he said with a magnanimous smile, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Enjoy the party. Everything is perfect." "No, it's not. The old man from this morning, the video is everywhere. It has millions of views. Hashtag cancel Sterling Corp is the #1 trend worldwide. Sterling's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. So. A little bad press from some bleeding hearts. It will be forgotten by tomorrow. They'll move on to the next cat video. Now, where is Bellini? He's late. As if on cue, the murmuring of the crowd shifted, turning into a wave of hushed awe that swept towards the entrance. Maestro Antonio Bellini had arrived. But he was not alone. He walked with a deliberate, regal pace. At his side, his hand resting gently on his arm, was an old man dressed in a simple, clean but obviously borrowed dark suit. He looked overwhelmed, his eyes wide as he took in the opulence of the theater lobby. It was Samuel. Behind them walked Maya, the barista, holding a battered, closed violin case with the reverence of a holy relic. She looked defiant and proud. A small, well-dressed woman with a clipboard, who was clearly with the maestro, guided them through the stunned crowd. Sterling stared, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. He saw the old busker from the corner, the nuisance, being escorted into his party by his guest of honor. It was impossible. It made no sense. His mind struggled to compute the image. He thought perhaps it was a prank, a bizarre piece of performance art. Bellini's eyes, cold as glacial ice, scanned the crowd and found Sterling. He navigated through the parted sea of guests, Samuel still on his arm, and stopped directly in front of the CEO. The silence in the lobby was now absolute. Everyone was watching. "Mr. Sterling," Bellini said, his voice not loud, but carrying an incredible weight that cut through the cavernous space. "A generous host. You throw a magnificent party." Sterling, recovering his composure, forced a laugh. "Maestro. Welcome. I was getting worried." He glanced at Samuel, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "I see you've picked up a stray. Admirable, but the staff entrance is in the back." The insult hung in the air, thick and foul. Bellini's expression didn't change. "A stray? No. This man is not a stray. This man is Samuel Jones. He is the reason I can play the violin. He is the reason my foundation exists. He was my first and greatest teacher. He is, to me, a father. So, when you insult him, Mr. Sterling, you are insulting me." A collective gasp went through the room. Cameras, which had been discreetly put away, were now being raised everywhere. Evelyn looked like she was about to faint. Sterling's face went white. The dots were connecting in his brain with agonizing slowness. The old man. The violin. The video. The maestro. I don't understand, Sterling stammered, the picture of confusion. "Oh, I think you do," Bellini continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every person in the hall heard it. "This morning, you met my teacher. You found him playing music on a street corner, a corner he has graced for 15 years. And you, in your infinite importance, decided he was an eyesore. You didn't just ask him to leave. You had your man, Donovan I believe his name is, destroy his instrument. An instrument of no great monetary value to you, perhaps. But it was a masterpiece. A violin made in 1788 by the luthier Giovanni Battista Guadagnini. It was a gift to him from his own teacher. He called her Eleanor." Bellini paused, letting the name of the legendary luthier sink in. The connoisseurs in the crowd exchanged shocked looks. "A Guadagnini? Smashed on a sidewalk? You didn't just break a violin, Mr. Sterling. You broke a man's heart. You silenced a soul. And then you had your man toss a $100 bill on its remains. An act of cruelty so profound, so lacking in basic human decency, that it has, quite rightly, shocked the world. Bellini raised his voice slightly, addressing the entire room now. I came here tonight to raise money for Strings of the Soul, a foundation dedicated to putting instruments into the hands of children who need them. And our host, the man meant to be the champion of this cause, spent his morning smashing instruments belonging to the very soul of music itself. The irony is as sickening as the act itself. He turned back to Sterling, whose face was now a crumbling mask of horror and dawning comprehension. My foundation will, of course, be returning your 8-figure donation. We cannot, and will not, be associated with a man who holds the arts and the artists who create them in such utter contempt. He then looked at Samuel, his expression softening completely. Samuel. Maestro, he said, the honorific delivered with the deepest sincerity. Would you do us the honor? The woman with the clipboard stepped forward. Maya opened the battered violin case. Inside, nestled on the worn velvet, lay the splintered, tragic pieces of Eleanor. It was a gut-wrenching sight. The crowd murmured in pity and disgust. But Bellini gently shook his head. His assistant then presented another, far more pristine case. She opened it. Inside lay the Guarneri del Gesù. Bellini's own concert violin. An instrument so famous it had a name, the Phoenix. He lifted it with infinite care and held it out to Samuel. She is yours, my friend, Bellini said, his voice thick with emotion. She has been waiting for you to play her for a long time. Samuel looked from the priceless violin to Bellini's face, tears welling in his eyes. He shook his head. Antonio. I can't. My hands, they're old. I'm not worthy of such an instrument. You are the only one who is, Bellini insisted gently. Teach us again, Samuel. Show them what music really is. Play for Eleanor. Slowly, hesitantly, Samuel reached out and took the Phoenix. His gnarled fingers, which had seemed so empty and lost just hours before, wrapped around the neck of the violin. It was a perfect fit. It felt like coming home. He lifted the instrument to his chin, his posture straightening, the years seeming to fall away from him. He took the bow Bellini offered. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, he played. The first note was a sound of pure, heartbreaking sorrow. It was a lament for Eleanor, a cry of pain that echoed through the grand hall and silenced every whisper. But then, the music began to shift. It swelled into a melody of resilience, of hope reborn from ashes. It was a complex, beautiful piece that no one in the room had ever heard before. It was Samuel's own composition, a story told in music. It spoke of love and loss, of injustice and dignity, of a soul that had been broken but refused to be silenced. The music was sublime. It was technically brilliant, but more than that, it was profoundly human. It was the sound that Sterling, with all his money, could never buy, and with all his power, could never create. It was the antithesis of everything he was. As Samuel played, his eyes were closed, lost in the music just as he had been on the street corner. But now, his audience was not the hurried passers-by, but the captivated elite of the city, all of them witnesses to this extraordinary act of redemption. Antonio Bellini stood by his side, watching his old master, his face a portrait of pride and love. Alastair Sterling stood alone, a pariah in the center of his own party. The flashes of cameras were relentless, capturing his humiliation from every angle. His empire, built on a reputation of ruthless efficiency, was crumbling under the weight of a simple, beautiful melody. He saw his investors in the crowd, their faces grim. He saw the board members, their expressions a mixture of fury and panic. He saw the reporters, their pens flying across their notepads, writing the obituary of his career. He had tried to crush a nobody, and in doing so, had revealed to the world that he himself was nothing more than a hollow shell. When the final, triumphant note of Samuel's piece faded, the silence held for a beat, pregnant with emotion. Then, the theater erupted. It wasn't the polite, measured applause of a gala. It was a thunderous, heartfelt, standing ovation. It was an ovation for Samuel, for his music, for his dignity. It was a roar of approval for the maestro's act of loyalty and a resounding condemnation of Sterling's cruelty. Samuel opened his eyes, looking out at the sea of faces, dazed. Bellini put a proud arm around his shoulder. "Welcome back, maestro," he whispered. Sterling didn't wait to hear more. He turned and fled, pushing through the crowd, a disgraced king abandoning his collapsing castle. The jeers and insults followed him out into the cold night air. The gala was over. His reign was over. The next day, the headlines were brutal. The CEO and the maestro, how an act of cruelty brought down a titan. Sterling Corp stock plummets after CEO's public humiliation. Alastair Sterling was forced to resign in disgrace. His company, facing boycotts and a PR nightmare, went into a tailspin from which it would never fully recover. Donovan, the security guard, faced charges for assault and destruction of property. And what of Samuel? The world now knew his name. Offers poured in from concert halls around the globe. He was interviewed, celebrated, a reluctant hero. But he turned them all down. He didn't want the fame or the fortune. He had something far more valuable. With Bellini's help, he established a new foundation, funded by anonymous donors who had been moved by his story. They opened a small music school in his old neighborhood, in the very building he used to lean against. They named it, the Eleanor Project. Its mission was simple, to find the music in children who felt silenced, to give them a voice when they felt the world refused to listen. Sometimes, on warm afternoons, the people of Fifth and Amberside would hear a familiar, beautiful sound. They would look over and see Samuel, sitting not on a milk crate, but on a proper bench outside his school. He would be playing the Phoenix, not for any crowd or for any coins, but for himself, for the children listening with wide-eyed wonder, and for the memory of an old violin that taught him that even when a string is broken, its echo can change the world. The music was back. And this time, it was louder than ever.